The heart of recognition is spoken only in relation to self-recognition and nothing else.
Sept with the capital S?
Whatever you wish. In Persian language there are no capitals. Everything is in a lowercase already. In Sanskrit it's the same. There's no capital, you cannot capitalize. It's a tribute we pay to different grammar. It is therefore, for that reason, that it was also spoken of as the secret supreme. Because of that path of self-recognition. But if the context here and point of reference is egoic identity which is not transcended, then it will immediately usurp this recognition in a totally perplexed manner. Just as traditionally the Advaita Vedanta philosophy was taught to a fully and highly prepared aspirant and never casually spoken to a passerby or to the newcomer. And this is where the big difference between talking about it and doing it, if you will. Talking about it versus actually living it. And this would probably now answer the question that we're anticipating later on, that came up. So why is it so popular nowadays? This particular approach that nothing needs to be done because you are already that. There is no identity in you other than that. It doesn't matter perceived or misperceived, whether you identify or misidentify yourself. It's irrelevant because consciousness is not an object to itself. And there is nothing other than consciousness. Everything that so-called or seemingly appears to consciousness appears on the account of perceptual capacity present within consciousness to cognize itself, no matter what modulation it can go or undergo. It remains nothing other than consciousness. So that luminous nature of our reality is unperturbed by the weather at a psychological dimension of our current experience. But if this is taken as a standpoint without some qualitative transformation, without transcendence, then this is nothing other than a wishful thinking. And one would have to hear it again and again and again and again. Hence the popularity of the satsang movement. Hence the popularity of the so-called teachings based on Neo-Advaita, or loosely based on Neo-Advaita. Whereas, for the one, if one can claim that he or she got it, there will be no necessity in any dialogue, in any conversation, in anything whatsoever. There will be no necessity, no wish for any affirmation or confirmation. How can that be? That in itself is an oxymoron. If one got it, how can one then go about asking for confirmation? If one knows the worth of a brick of gold, and one knows this is gold, why would one want to go to the goldsmith and ask, what do you think about this? Do you think this is a metal? Well, then obviously you are clueless that this is gold in the first place. And whatever analogy we may want to replace it with, whatever metaphor is more preferred here. So in other words, where am I hinting here? There are several possibilities, but narrowing down, there are two. One, if we are to agree with the proponents and those who have themselves arrived, that these teachings can only be imparted to those who are highly prepared and ready to receive it, which then in turn means that the title of the retreat was just that, a publicity stunt. Or for those who came not for the title, because title was irrelevant, something else was at stake or something else was motivating force, then it doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah.
What matters is that we're here and now. Not that I want to avoid again, somehow, delving into that. I'm very happy to delve into this theme. But I invite all of you to delve into this with clarity of understanding that this would not bear fruits on the account alone that something may be grasped. One may and would have certain sudden intuitive insight, maybe a few. But this will all be a passing phenomenon again if it is not rooted in the main bread and butter of the process itself. Therefore, the work continues, and for some, the work just begins. And we are welcomed to look into this with due understanding. Because if we are, and up until we view this from that egocentric perspective, then of course it will be a matter of I want it now. And I want it because I wanted to use it. It has to be useful. It cannot be just, it has to be useful. It has to make sense to my life, whatever that is, my life, because no one really has a clue of what that is, but it still sounds quite intimate and quite relevant because it's my life. How can that be otherwise? Since it's my life, it is relevant. Therefore, it has to have purpose, it has to be useful. Therefore, it is okay also to be ready for this from the start, from the get-going, that there will be this deciphering of what to take and what to leave out. Because this is also the very much in the nature of that temporal identity. This is what this temporal identity is known for. It is eager to modify all the time and to make out of it what fits, what is useful. And of course we will talk about it from the so-called positive perspective, that in itself there's nothing wrong with that. But the elusive nature and why it is not so easy, otherwise that it would have been a piece of cake. Why there should be a big deal to realize one's own essence, if that one's own essence anyway? Why is it such a big deal? It's already my essence. It's your essence. It's who you are. Why there needs to be even any realization? There are, I'm sure, teachings out there, perspectives, as what have you, that even going into the spiritual practice, there is this whole thing is like the seeking itself is the greatest predicament. There are even perspectives, then the more you seek, the further you move away. That the seeking itself is that chasing your own tail. Equally valid, a reminder of that Christian mystic, then the less of myself there is, the more of the God there is. And the God here can be replaced with the self. The less myself there is, the more space, the more room there is for the divine. So one way or the other, if one even still bites into this quite obviously dualistic perspective, but it is useful dualistic perspective here because it works. It reminds us of that necessity of transcendence. That whether we like it or not, the algorithm here, the proportional equation here, is always dependent on how much of that individual identity our own consciousness is able to integrate back into its own fabric. Therefore, one way or the other, one may feel that one can usurp this teaching, but one will be just wearing emperor's clothes. Because it doesn't come with some kind of special something. Nothing happens with it, like even Eckhart Tolle talks about it, for God's sake. That enlightenment doesn't make one better in any way. The bank account doesn't increase from being enlightened. If your karma to be wealthy, rich, you will be. If your karma is not, enlightenment may make you feel like you are Midas. But it doesn't necessarily transcends into equity. Translates into equity. Okay, we're entering here different zones, of course. One can then, like scholars now, you can come up and ask me, wait a minute, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi said that with the increase of consciousness, there is increase in every field of life. How can that be otherwise? Because every field of life is not separate from consciousness. It's that same consciousness, isn't it? And yet I know many long-time meditators who complain that they did not yet hit the mark of 1 million. And they are not, to me, look as if they wasted their time. Many of them seemed quite advanced. Is it something wrong they're doing? Is that can be a special mantra for increasing that? Now all this, you see, this is like I said, we are still cooking. So cooking means also chopping, right? Peeling, preparing, throwing into. So don't get a little bit like, like a little bit of seasoning here, seasoning there, right? Seeing how it goes. Don't, watch out with the salt. Some squeeze of lemon here. Mm-hmm. Speaking of which, it's lunchtime. So that in itself is a telling metaphor. The metaphor that is waiting for us in actuality.